Okay, so today it's a bit late, but we're checking out Code Shifter on the Nintendo Switch. This one, it comes from Arc System Works, and as concepts go, I could not be more excited. This one, it's combining action platforming, an original story, and then it throws in tons of characters from Arc's back catalogue. That means you can expect to see Blazblue, Guilty Gear, River City Ransom, just to give you a few examples. The big question though, can this one deliver? Well, hit subscribe, hit like, leave me a comment with your favourite Arc System Works game or series below in the comments. Mine, easy decision, Blazblue. I picked up a fight stick for the Switch purely for that one. But with that though, let's get started. So Code Shifters, it tells the story of the games company Awesome Rainbow Corp, or Arc. See what they did there? Arc, they're getting ready to release the final version of their new game. Unfortunately though, things start falling to pieces when bugs start appearing all over the game. Here you'll be taking on the role of Stella, a programmer who develops a debug program known as Code Shifter. This debug program, it allows you to traverse the code as Sarah, an action platforming badass, and you'll get to work on taking these bugs down. The big aim, clean up the game before release date. Now as ideas go, I thought it was actually a pretty cool concept, this one. Unfortunately though, story requires solid execution, and they really struggled here for me. For such a simplistic storyline, it just seems to go on and on. They even put cutscenes and dialogue between every single level, so you're going to be sitting there for like 10 minutes just smashing that A button to get past it to the next stage of the platforming. I think the big problem with the story, they don't really develop the characters or really what's happening, to be honest. Sarah and her team at Arc, they're basically just having the same conversation over and over again. Oh look, there's a new bug that's appeared, let's get in there and kill it. It needed more. The text box is just way too much text overload with very little detail, and then we have all these like cool ass Arc characters from other titles. They get really no story or reason at all. They're just randomly here in 8-bit form, other than taking part in like a brawler-esque game, the game they're going to be releasing. I came to this one because I wanted to honestly play as my favourite Arc characters, and I will say I got that. I was hoping the game though would also introduce me to a cool new cast. It didn't. Instead I just kind of suffered to get to see my 8-bit sprites of Blazblue, of River City. Story, seriously disappointing, disruptive to the gameplay, and it needs some serious stripping back and some fine tuning. So gameplay in the main bulk of the game here, it's action platforming. Starting each level as Sarah, you'll be facing the typical platforming tropes, you know, think moving platforms, floating platforms that drop, spikes, the occasional teleportation portal, and then of course a whole lot of attacks on enemies, and yeah, jumping. If you've played a platformer in the last few years, this one, it's not going to get you by surprise or anything. It's not really doing anything different or new for the genre. Combat though, we basically get 3 attack types, a standard attack, a downward attack, and an upward attack. On top of this then, we also get a special move too. These specials, they're determined by the suit you are wearing as Sarah, so it could be a heavy attack or maybe a defensive move instead, for example. These suits, you unlock them by defeating bosses every 5 levels, so as you progress from file type to file type, you'll be seeing 1 boss per turn. The first file we come across, it's the programmer's file, it's his code, but next we move on to the artist's file. That's how they change up these levels and give it some sort of difference in its stylistic nature. To assist in your missions, we have a huge number of Arc System characters, I will say that, and they come in the form of, let's say, pickups. They're like holograms scattered around the world that you interact with. These though, they again come in 2 forms. First, you've got the hero. These you can shapeshift to take control of them, or you can just freely shift between, different characters, so you might want to be an Arc character 1 second, then Sarah the next. Moves wise though, it's the same as Sarah, but you're going to see obviously in visuals the trademark moves attached that you'd expect, like my favourite Ragnar the Blood Edge. Dude is just always kicking ass. This shifting though, it also does become part of the navigation and let's say the puzzling of this game too. You might need, let's say, Sarah for a large jump, for example. She has a double jump ability, so that makes sense. But then the next moment you might need a light character who can jump on a gust of wind to push them up to a much higher place. So for that moment, think someone like Rachel Alucard from Blazblue. She's going to be able to get there, she's going to be much lighter in weight. It's a navigation tool as much as a combat one, and that's actually a decent concept. I did really enjoy that part of this title. Now each of these heroes also has a type attached to them, so think fire, ice, electricity. This will also come into play. You know, you might need to mount ice doors or power electronic platforms. You're going to need to find the corresponding character type to complete that ability. They've come here and they've gave them more to do than simply fight, and I will say I appreciate that. It also forces the player to experiment with different casts of characters, because to be honest, if it was me and it didn't force my hand to do this, I know I'd be playing with probably the same 2 or 3 over and over again. Next up then, we also get support characters. They're essentially like blitz attacks. You can use them for a few seconds at a time. It's a great item for when you're overwhelmed or, let's say, facing off against bigger enemies or bosses. These, you don't really need them, to be honest, that often. It's just a single button press, so they're going to jump out for a few seconds, kick some ass, and then go away. It's a nice addition, but honestly, it's more an excuse to get a few more characters in here that we can't necessarily control, but you know, just in case they missed your favourite, you might find them here. On the side of all the platforming then, we get 3D segments where you walk around the office, you know, you can talk to colleagues, and these moments, they're really just here to push the story forward, and that's about it. You can find a game that we'll talk about later that you can interact with, and that's really about it for these sections, so don't expect to see too much of that kind of artistic style other than cutscenes and text boxes. Here's the problem with this game: the platforming, the fighting, it is just boring. Uninspired level design, repetitive enemies that just bring very little to the gameplay, or you know, they don't really drive any different types of tactics from you as the player. Also, the game can be a little cheap occasionally. Think a teleportation portal that takes you all the way back to the beginning of the level. They tried to make things exciting by having these sections where you get trapped in an arena. It's called Confliction, and you basically need to face off against a wave of enemies before an invisible wall drops. It doesn't add anything to the enjoyment, if I'm honest. It just felt very heavy-handed and very forced. I just struggled overall to have fun with this one, which is crazy to me considering some of the characters in here. I really do love these games, these characters. Then also, when you factor in some of these Legends of the Fighter genres, I will say controls just also don't feel good. The combat's weak. For example, Ragnar, I never truly felt like Ragnar or any of the characters here. Yes, they definitely look like them in 8-bit form, but they don't play like them at all. Perhaps the biggest disappointment for me though, there's actually a clear delay between the input on the controller and the action on screen. It's enough, I will say, to naturally notice it. I didn't have to, you know, look into this or be very picky and kind of like test it in front of the screen. You can feel it almost immediately that when you press jump, there's just that slight delay. When you press attack, there's just that slight delay. That is not good. It is only a split second, I'll say that, but with a platforming and combat based title, it can be pretty damaging when you need to make a quick decision. Gameplay though, overall, it's 5 levels and a boss and repeat as you jump through the different files of the game. Like I said, you know, the artist file, the coder's file, and so on. For such a inspired idea, shall we say, it's an extremely uninspired delivery. I should also mention here, you can do 2-player, but it's also pretty weak. It's actually a 1-player game, and they've basically thrown this in for the sake of it, and that's evident because the camera always follows player 1, so if player 2 goes off screen, they're going to teleport back next to you. I'm not personally a fan of this style, but if you want to pick up and play where someone can just jump in alongside you, then this game definitely offers that. So outside of this then, to increase that replayability, each stage awards you a rating, hit a certain ranking, and unlock skills and upgrades. Think, you know, attack power increases or health bar increases. Nothing out of the ordinary, but it's a nice touch. Last up for gameplay then, in the studio itself, you can play a game called Colorful Fighters. It's an 8-bit Smash Bros clone using your favourite characters from Ark's back catalogue. It's definitely not deep, but it's fun for a short while, and to be honest, this is actually where I had the most fun with this entire package. This game, it's just kind of cool to see it. As I say, you're not going to be coming back for months on end, but you should get a couple of hours of entertainment from it. So graphics, they're weird. Let's start, that's all I can say, honestly. Let's start with the 3D segments. I don't like them. You know, the overworld idea, okay, cool. I'm good with that. I like that idea. But it's just the style of this section. It reminds me of like a cell phone game immediately. There's very little to do here, unfortunately. It's simply, you know, push the story forward with text boxes, select your computer to choose your mission. There's very few cutscenes, and even when they do have a cutscene kind of esque piece, it's a standing team meeting, so not exactly high energy stuff. This whole section, it just didn't sit right with me. More than anything, the real pain I have was just clearly a stylistic choice. The animation of Stella. When you walk, she can only face certain directions, so she'll kind of be like sliding sideways or diagonally as she walks, and it all feels very just kind of cheap looking, if anything. Now for the core gameplay though, they really needed to, in my opinion, choose what visual style they wanted, because I don't really get it. The combination of 2.5D and 8-bit, it just kind of looks strange. I'm sure the idea sounded good, but when you put them together and look at it, something doesn't quite feel right. Both separately look fine, honestly. The modern graphics, shall we say, they're sharp, nice colours, some decent if repetitive enemy design, and the worlds, they change enough that it keeps things fresh. Yes, I will say the crisp style, it can be a little bit dry and soulless feeling at times, but generally they do work. Then though, we get these cool ass 8-bit sprites of all of our favourite ARC characters, and they look awesome. But they look weird inhabiting this world. You go from almost like that 2.5D character model to this very flat character on a 3D world. I just can't get my head around it. Maybe it's just me. Let me know in the comments below what you think of that. It just doesn't click. Both visual styles though, as I say, again, they've been done fine. I just don't think they necessarily work together, and I'm not sure why they maybe thought this was a good or interesting idea. So last up for graphics, we get some pretty decent boss designs in the game. They're, the typical boss that repeats a pattern for you to figure out, but animation wise, it's strong. And then, of course, let's talk about Colourful Fighters, the add-on Smash Bros clone. This thing looks awesome. Sticking these 8-bit characters in an 8-bit world, that makes more sense, and it feels instantly more visually pleasing. Overall for graphics, the 3D world, I'm sorry, it's cheap, but the platforming and the characters, they all look decent enough. It's just not quite working when we mash them together for me. It's an interesting idea. For me, it didn't quite work, but I'm sure there will be people out there who really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm curious to see what the kind of reception to this is. Last up, audio. Sound effects are decent, we get attacks, we get enemies, we get keyboard and office sounds. There's nothing really amazing here, but they've done a decent enough job. I don't like the dialogue sound. It's that usual common like mumble sound we get in games, they're not actually saying anything. They've added this weird like high pitch to it all. I really didn't like it. It was kind of driving me insane, actually. It feels very mechanical and very almost like alien-like. It's not what you want when human characters are talking, basically, or at least not for me. With ARC though, there's one thing I wanted, and they delivered. The soundtrack, as always with these guys, it's amazing. Soundtracks, they continue to just put out a high quality. I love the music. You get a different theme for every different character you see. All the way through the game, it's just changing all over the place. There's a lot to like in here, and it pretty much honestly lifts this whole audio experience, and rightly so, just to an incredible piece of work. So yeah, the final verdict, Codeshifter is a huge disappointment, and it sucks to say that, I'm sorry. ARC have put out some amazing pieces, as I said, Blazblue, Guilty Gear. I'm pretty sure everyone at some point has played one of their games by now. I had high hopes for this, a crossover combining some of my favourite characters, but placing them in a platforming world. Sounds great, right? Well, sadly, a boring story that's way too frequent, needs some serious fine-tuning. We've got controls which are weak, and the characters never really feel like they should. There's no attempt at all here to at least make you feel slightly like each one is different. On top of this, then finally, weak level design and a slight input delay. That's the big one, honestly. It's not good. Yeah, it's got, good music. It's got a nice little bonus game that we talked about, Colourful Fighters. Even the graphics, separately or together, whatever you fancy, they are still done very nicely. But that's not enough to carry a game, especially when it's $20 in the US, £17.09 in the UK, weird price, or €19. I came here to see some of my favourite characters do something new, and then maybe find a new cast and world to enjoy. Instead, what I got was basically me waiting around just to try out each of my favourite characters of past titles, and then basically being disappointed. I didn't care about this new world or cast, and trying to get through the boring story as quickly as possible. That's a real shame. I'm giving Codeshifter on the Nintendo Switch a below average 4 out of 10. If you're an ARC fan on the Switch, stick to Blazblue or Guilty Gear, and then if you're tempted or you just want to see your characters like me, I'd at least suggest waiting on a sale. Too many issues make this one suffer, and without Colourful Fighters, honestly, I'd probably be dropping this down to, you know, are free. Thanks so much for watching. Have you or will you be picking this one up? Hit subscribe. We are so close to 1,500 subscribers and we can't thank you all enough for that. Hit like and we'll see you all on the next Gaming X.